Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Marcus Aurelius is attributed to the quote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Well, on today's episode, we're going to delve into the topic of mental strength and resilience, what you need to know to build and maintain it, embracing change, and more. My guest is a preeminent psychotherapist, mental strength trainer, a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author of 6 books, an award-winning podcast host, and a sought-after keynote speaker whose TEDx talk is one of the most viewed talks of all time with more than 23 million views. She's been featured by popular media outlets including Inside Edition, Fox News Health Talk, CNBC, Good Morning America, Oprah.com, and many others. Please welcome the woman who's helping all of us stop doing things that rob us of the mental strength we need to become our best, Amy Morin. Amy, thank you so much for being here. It is great to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure, Jay.
Well, it is a pleasure for me as well, so thank you. And I'm so excited about our conversation today. I know we're going to bring so much great insight and wisdom to our audience. So let's dive in. Amy, I thought a good starting point for us would be for you to share what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think my favorite thing is that I still get to surprise myself. So I grew up in rural Maine and I was the kind of shy kid that rarely spoke. And now I get to live on a sailboat and make a living by speaking. So the fact that I get to do really cool things and I just challenge all of those things I thought I believed about myself. And it's fun every day to be all, hey, look, I can do something I didn't originally think I could do.
Hey, that is definitely surprising. I love that, and that you can still surprise yourself today. I think that's a beautiful thing. So you mentioned about beliefs. Since you said that, I'm just curious, what is something that you believed about yourself early in life that you discovered later wasn't true?
I would say it goes back to that idea that I don't have anything valuable to say. And if you looked at my report cards from the time I was in kindergarten until the time I graduated from high school, almost every single teacher commented on the fact that I never spoke. And I had wonderful friends and a sister who always spoke for me, to the point that I never raised my hand, I never volunteered information, never asked questions, and didn't dare talk. And it wasn't until adulthood that I realized that perhaps I have something interesting to say. And then, as you mentioned in my intro, I have a TEDx talk that has 23 million views. But had it not been for certain series of events in my life and opportunities to do things, I'm not sure I would have ever believed differently. I had to find the evidence to the contrary.
Well, let's, on that point about feeling like you didn't have anything valuable to say, I'll just add from a personal perspective and my own story. I spent pretty much the entire first part of my life hiding in the back of the room, not wanting to use my voice, certainly not standing up, not raising my hand to answer a question. And it took me years of deep work to really figure out, number one, why, and number two, to find my voice that quite frankly was always within, but now I find myself with a microphone speaking on stages, podcasts, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really, it's an interesting transition to make. So for your own story, what was it that was keeping you from, because you mentioned being shy. I mean, I would say I was shy too. I was really more of probably an ambivert, but mostly shy back then. But for you, what was it that was holding you back from speaking or raising your hand or saying the things that you had to say?
I think it was a combination of things. So I think I was a little bit shy naturally, but the more that people emphasized it, again, every teacher I ever had would write on my report card, we never hear Amy's voice. If you want to make somebody who already feels a little shy feel even more shy, let's comment on how much they don't talk and make them the center of attention. And that happened year after year after year. And I mean, I still have the stack of old report cards that say it, but I think every year it was just cemented into my head of I'm the shy kid who doesn't talk, because that's what I was labeled by teachers who were well-meaning, and I think they were trying to encourage me or to at least let my parents know, hey, she has the answer, she just won't raise her hand. But the more attention they drew to it, the worse that it got. And now as an adult, I know that that happens with anything. If you point out things with people, that often reinforces whatever it is they're doing. You put labels on somebody, they'll live up to that label. I think they just had no idea that by referring to me as the shyest kid in the class, painfully shy was another label put on me. All of those labels made it so I was less likely to talk. And then as the years went on, because I had really outgoing friends, they would just raise their hand for me. And even to this day, my sister recently visited me down in the Florida Keys, and we were at a table that didn't have an umbrella, and I'm a pale person, so I burn in the sun. And so she immediately asks the wait staff if we can get an umbrella for a table. And I was like, I could have asked for that myself. She's like, I know, I forget. Because it's just, once you have a label placed on you, it's hard to outlive it. And it's hard for people to see you differently, but it's also really hard for you to see yourself differently.
Yeah, that is so true. Well, I guess the benefit to growing up that way and having those experiences is now, as you were continuing through your own training and the help that you do with your clients, you've got the knowledge and the toolkit to be able to help others break through those patterns, let's say, those things that keep us stuck. And so I feel you on that. And it really is amazing how if somebody else that you put trust and belief in says something about you that may not be true, how we hold on to that story and we just keep repeating it over and over again into those loops. And it really does, it creates some grooves that we have to undo, we have to unlearn. So I look forward to continuing the conversation here. So you have an amazing story of grief and building yourself back and resilience and so forth. And, in life, we have experiences that can transform or really shape the person who we are. So speak to your personal story, if you will, to give us some context on your background, and then we'll pull the timeline forward a bit.
Sure. The year after I became a therapist, my mom passed away suddenly. I was 23. And she had a brain aneurysm. And it was the first huge loss I'd gone through. And suddenly it was no longer about just teaching people in my therapy office these skills. It was like, hey, gosh, I need to figure out, how do I get through this incredibly painful time in my life? And for the first time ever, too, I was just really studying people in my therapy office. So many of my clients would come in and they were still hopeful and happy people despite these things they'd been through. But I had other people that would come in and they were just angry and bitter, and they had bought into that notion that time heals, and they had waited for something to feel better. And it might be a decade that they went through something tough, and 10 years later they weren't feeling better. And they wanted to know why. Well, it's not about the time, it's about what you do with your time. I personally wanted to then say, how do I get a hold of my time and make sure I'm investing it in a way that I can work through my painful experience? And then to add insult to injury, the 3-year anniversary of the day my mom died, my husband died of a heart attack. So I'm 26, I don't have my mom, and I now don't have my husband. And every dream that I had and everything I thought my life was going to be was gone in an instant. We'd been foster parents, and I had to decide, do I still want to be a foster parent, and do I want to adopt a child? I didn't have any money. I was a therapist. Therapists don't make tons of money, but I still had to work as a therapist because I didn't have a choice. I didn't want to be homeless. We had a house already, and I had to pay the mortgage. And had to figure out, how do I go to work with a broken heart? How am I going to figure this out? How am I supposed to help other people when my own life is falling apart? And one of the things I started doing was freelance writing, because I could make a couple bucks in the evening or on the weekends when I could do it. And as I rebuilt my life, it took years to figure out what I wanted to do, what dreams I was going to let go of, and what I still wanted to hold on to, and what the next chapter was going to look like. But freelance writing gave me enough money that I could stay in my house. So I'm so grateful that I didn't have to move. I'm in the middle of all of these other things going on in life. So I stayed there. And a few years after that, I was fortunate. I found love again. I got a new job. I got a new house, and life was starting to look good. But my father-in-law was diagnosed with terminal cancer around the same time. And I just thought, oh, how do I go through one more loss? And I wrote myself a letter of what mentally strong people don't do. And it was just a list of these things that I didn't want to do today. If I could just get through the day and not do these things, and somehow I'd be okay. And I found the list helpful, so I thought maybe it would help somebody else. So I put it on the internet. I got paid $15 for it. But it wasn't about the money. It was about helping people. And 50 million people read it. One of them happened to be a literary agent who said you should write a book. But I didn't even know what a literary agent was, to be honest. And didn't plan to write a book because I said, there's no context for it. When I put it online, it was literally just the list. So everybody assumed, hey, a therapist wrote this, so she knows these things. But the truth was I struggled with all 13 things, and I wasn't sure I wanted to tell everybody that because I thought, is that going to ruin my credibility as a therapist if I step forward and say, hey, I actually struggle with this. But decided to do so, and that's been 10 years now, and I have 6 books, and I've been able to speak about mental strength, and I get to be on shows like yours to keep talking about how to be mentally strong because I think it was something that resonated with so many people because we don't talk enough about mental strength. But really, the information I learned wasn't as much from the textbooks as it was my own personal experiences.
Well, it's remarkable what you have been able to accomplish from the time that you wrote that letter to yourself and published that online. Obviously, it's impacted millions of lives, including mine. And when I read your book, a couple of things that came to my mind immediately. Number one, you had published that book, or the book was published several years ago, yet the information is as fresh and relevant and timely today as it was when the book was published. So the fact that we're having the conversation right now, still talking about those 13 things and your research and what you've learned through your own growth, how does that make you feel, just knowing that the information is still as relevant today? Actually, I think it is equally as relevant, and sometimes even more so now with what's going on in the world than ever before.
It's incredible to think about. When I wrote it, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure anybody would read the book, but it's in like 40-something languages now. I kind of lose track. And here it is 10 years later. I never dreamed that this would be the case. And I'm so glad that it's resonated, that people want to keep learning about what it means to be mentally strong. Because I agree, the world is tough. And why we don't teach these skills in school, why we don't learn about emotions, why nobody talks about how to change your mindset or how to reframe your thoughts, I don't know. And I wish that it would become curriculum for school. I wish that so many more people would learn about these things when they were younger. And that's the message I kept getting from readers, which led to the parenting book, because so many people who read the first book said my entire life would have been different if I had only learned this as a child. How do I teach my kids? So I'm thrilled that we're now able to talk about it in terms of children, and that we're talking about it as something like, just like we talk about physical health and physical strength, it's okay to talk about mental health and mental strength too.
Absolutely. And I want to stay on that point, or a bit better yet, I want to come back to that point about teaching these skills in schools, because I completely agree with you, and I'm curious what specific actions you've already taken beyond the other book that you wrote for parents, but things that maybe you are doing to try to incorporate this as part of a curriculum in schools, or do you feel that maybe that's somebody else's responsibility to take care of? So why don't we, I was going to ask you something else, but because we're on that point, speak to that. Is there something specifically that you're doing to try to get this into different school districts?
Yeah, that's a great question and very timely. So I wrote a book eventually that was 13 Things Strong Kids Do. And it's with the hope that if kids read this book when they're 8, they won't grow up to develop the bad habits that most of us do. So then they won't need the book about what not to do. So I wrote the parenting book first because I wanted parents to know, how do you coach your kids in this? Because if your 8-year-old reads a book, they're not then going to go home and implement it. They need some reinforcement from the adults around them. And I'm thrilled that so many teachers have adopted the book. I've gotten emails from teachers all over the country who said, I'm reading this to my class. Or I had a teacher who said, we bought copies for everybody in the classroom. And I actually had a kid who bought the book, loved it so much, and said, all my friends need this. And so he saved up his allowance and wrote me a letter, took a picture of all the kids in his class. He bought them all a book, and he sent me a letter about how he saved up his own allowance money to make sure that his friends would have these skills. So absolutely love that this is happening, and have teachers working with me right now to ask about how do we create a curriculum. So the book's going to relaunch in paperback later this year, and so I'm working on a teacher's guide because I want parents and teachers to have this information. If we all use the same language, like when you're worried about a test or when you're upset with your friends, what do you do? And I want kids to have these actionable strategies that they can apply right now.
Gosh, I love that so much. And I love that story about that one student. What an amazing gift and what an amazing heart in a way to be able to give back to others. And I can tell you, I'm just, as I'm listening to you, first of all, the hairs on my arm are standing up as I'm listening to you tell this story, because I can think about and I can start to see connections being made and you creating this guide. Because from my own personal story and what I experienced and the suffering and just the pain that I had in my own life, having these skills and being able to have these conversations and knowing where to go and how to have these conversations is huge. And I'm by no means would I point fingers at my parents, but they didn't know how to have these conversations, right? They didn't have the tools or the skills to do so. So I love this. This is so good. So I want to step back again for a moment. So you lose your mother when you're 23. Your mother was young. As you think back, what was one or two of the most valuable lessons that you learned from your mother that you still carry with you today?
Ooh, that's another great question. So my mom was somebody who used to be incredibly generous. And she would always say, well, you can't take it with you when talking about money. And I can remember, I always knew she gave to people. She never hesitated to do really kind things that I think people would think were outrageous today. Like one time we were visiting my cousin in the hospital, and she met this family whose child was in the hospital, and they couldn't afford a hotel, so they were sleeping in their car. She brought them home with her that day and was like, these people, it was an hour drive, but she said they can't sleep in their car. And so my dad worked nights at the time. He comes home from work in the morning and there are these complete strangers sleeping on our pull-out couch because we lived in a tiny apartment ourselves. But she was like, we couldn't let them sleep in the car. They have a sick child and stuff like that. She never hesitated to do. Like she would bring people home who were struggling and here we were. And I knew some of the stories because I was there, but it wasn't until actually her wake. She was a postmaster at a post office, and sometimes people's check wouldn't come in on a Friday. And the stories that I would hear is somebody would say, I went in to pick up my check on a Friday, it wasn't there, and I said, I don't have any food to eat, and your mom gave me cash. And so all of these stories of people I'd never met, people I'd never heard of, and stuff that my mother used to do. And so I try to carry that with me, that hoarding money or doing all of these things in life, what really matters, the kindness that we show to other people. That's by far the biggest lesson that she taught me.
Wow, what a beautiful gift. So when you do something like that, does it spark an instant connection and memory to your mom? And just knowing
Absolutely.
that that's something that she gave you, I love that.
Right. I don't bring people to my house to spend the night. The strangers that I don't know. However, I try to take the spirit of what she used to do and make sure that I'm showing kindness. And whenever I do, I hear her in my head saying, "Well, you can't take it with you. So what does it matter in the end if how much money you had in your bank account?"
Absolutely. And you know what? You're doing that in the gifts that you bring to the world through your writings, through your books, through your podcasts, through your messages, through your talks, etc., right? Because you're giving back to others as well and helping to change other people's lives. So I love that. I think that's amazing. So I'm going to ask you the exact same question about your father. What is a key lesson that you've that you took away from your father early in life that you carry with you today?
Ooh, that's another one too. I would say probably that the things that you expect to be the biggest things in your life, like in a certain way, don't. That it's more like you never know where an opportunity might come from, and it might be something that you weren't expecting to be an opportunity, and it turns into something that positively changes your life. His example was he came from an incredibly difficult background and a lot of hardship in his family, and he got drafted into the Vietnam War when he was 19, and he's grateful. He said, getting drafted saved my life. He's pretty sure had he not been drafted, he would have ended up in the same pattern a lot of his family ended up in, which they were into drugs and that sort of a thing. And so he's like, at the time, obviously the last thing I wanted to do was to get drafted into war, but he's like, that saved me. And I think he's really generous and kind to everybody as well, but he just is very much into something lands in your lap, you never know. Like the awful thing that you think is happening to you right now might end up being the thing that saves you.
That is, how amazing is that? What a way to be able to reframe a situation. And it just kind of goes to how two people can look at the exact same thing and see totally different things, right? Because it's the meaning that we attach to those things that really matter. And that's so interesting. And what a beautiful gift to be able to give to you. So I want to stay on the question of lessons, because I want to go back to Lincoln. In the short time that the two of you had together, what was one of the big lessons that Lincoln taught you about life?
That's a great question too. So he and I had very different personalities, and his personality was incredibly outgoing and adventurous. And his whole thing was, either it's going to work out or you're going to have a good story. And so in life, you couldn't really embarrass him, or if something didn't work out, the more it didn't work out, the better the story. And he had incredible stories, and people just absolutely were attracted to him because he would be like, you guys, listen to what happened the other day. And it might be something that I personally wouldn't have repeated because it would be an incredibly embarrassing story, and he couldn't wait to tell people. And it made me realize, like, wow, people aren't judging you for the embarrassing things or the mistakes they made. They can relate to you, and they actually like you a lot better when you're the one who tells these stories. So I learned a lot of those kinds of lessons from my short time that I was able to be married with him.
How wonderful. Yeah, I'm like the polar opposite of that, by the way.
I was too, and he'd be like, you guys, listen to this, and it would be the story and then everybody would laugh, and the story that gets repeated for years. But
absolutely. So as we were talking about children, and you were mentioning that you were fostering children at one stage in your life, how do you address, or did you address, grief and loss with the children that you were fostering?
Yeah, so the week that Lincoln died, we were supposed to be taking a foster child in that weekend. The child hadn't moved in with us. In that moment that he died, fortunately, we didn't have any kids in our house. And so that was a blessing for sure. I obviously didn't take the kid the next week. I put foster parenting on hold for quite a while, and then decided eventually, okay, I can be a single foster mom. I can figure this out, and I can do it. And so it took a while, though. I really wanted to work on myself before I had more kids come into my home. But boy, having foster children in my house was just, again, a reminder of like, all right, I only had my mom for 23 years, but like, how grateful am I that I had her for 23 years? One of the teenagers that had moved in with me, she was 14, and she'd lost both of her parents in completely unrelated accidents, and both of them had passed away. And I could just remember thinking, like, had that happened to me when I was a kid, I can't imagine. And then to move in with a stranger, like she moved into my house with a trash bag full of clothes and a couple of other small items. And she had a brother that didn't get to live with her, and she had other like various relatives, but she couldn't live with them for different reasons. But boy, again, it really put things into perspective. And then with kids, when they ask you like, where am I going to live eventually? And the answer is, I don't know. And to be a kid and have somebody be like, you're going to stay with a stranger for a while, and we don't know where you're going to live or when you're going to move next, incredibly difficult. But I have to say, the kids that would come into stay with me, I would learn just as much from them as I hope I was able to teach them about how do you deal with uncertainty? How do you deal with grief and loss? And in their case, a lot of times it was ambiguous grief because we didn't know if they were going to see their parents or when they were going to see them or how often they were going to see them. So I would say overall, though, them coming into my home taught me more about grief than anything else.
Wow, I will bet. So let's talk about mental strength. I mean, this is an area obviously that you focus on and that you are well known for and an expert in. First, if you could, would you define, I have my own definition of it, or at least what I think it is, but from your perspective and what you've seen and what you teach, what is mental strength?
So there's three parts to it: the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave. So the thoughts are about recognizing that a lot of the things you think aren't true. When your brain says, hey, you can't do that, or you're not good enough, it lies to you. So as you build mental strength, you can learn to weed out the facts from the opinions and figure out that some of the things you believe aren't necessarily true. Then the emotional component. You don't have to be happy all the time, but you also don't have to stay stuck in a dark place. It's about having the skills and the tools that you need to manage your emotions in a healthy way and to realize how those emotions affect the decisions that you make and the actions that you take. And then the action piece. Like, positive thinking doesn't really change your life. What does is the positive action. So you have to make sure that you're taking steps to change your life, that you're doing things, that you know what your values are, and that you're living according to those values. And when you combine those three things, you have mental strength. What people often think it is they think it's about acting tough. Like, I didn't cry at a funeral, so therefore I'm mentally strong, or I can really tough it out in this awful situation and deny that I'm in any pain, or I went through this traumatic thing and I bounced right back because I'm strong. But really, those things aren't necessarily hallmarks of mental strength. They might just mean that you feel like you have to have a tough exterior despite the pain that you feel on the inside.
And I would say that point right there is one that just lands and really does resonate with me. I was told on more than one occasion that, well, you have a stoic personality, and I didn't show emotion. Now I'm a much more emotionally charged individual, but I would just push my emotions down as far as I could so I didn't feel things, or at least I tried to say I didn't feel things. I did. I masked them as much as I possibly could. So that one really stings when I think about it from my perspective. So with that said, let's talk about then regulating our emotions first, our thoughts, and behaving in a positive manner despite our circumstances. So regulating our emotions. This is a big one. So could you share maybe some tools or some strategies that our listeners can start to think about and incorporate in their lives to be able to regulate their own emotions?
Sure. So the first step would be to just acknowledge what you're feeling and put a name to it. And I'll ask people, sometimes I'll do a speech and I'll be with a group of corporate professionals and I say, hey, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, write down as many feeling words as you can. And for about the first 10 seconds, they're writing, and you get to about 5 feeling words. You're like happy, sad, mad, anxious, scared, and you kind of run out, right? Because we talk about feeling so little that most of us don't even have the vocabulary to name emotions. So you can do a couple of things. You just go to Google and you print out a list of feeling words and you tape it on your bathroom mirror. When you're brushing your teeth twice a day, just say, how do I feel right now? And see if you can put a name to it. And sometimes it's conflicting. You might be happy about this new thing happening next week and sad about something you're leaving behind, or excited about something yet kind of nervous about it. But just see if you can get into that habit of saying, how do I feel? Put a name to it. And we know when you feel something uncomfortable, like anxiety or sadness, and you put a name to it, research will show it takes a little bit of the sting out of it. Just naming it helps your brain and your body figure out like, oh, that's what's going on right now. So name your emotions would be the first step. Second one would be to ask yourself, is what I'm feeling right now my friend or my enemy? So a lot of people will talk about emotions like they're positive or they're negative. Like excitement is a positive emotion, anger is a negative emotion. That's not true at all, right? If I come to you with a get-rich-quick scheme, you might be so excited about the fact that I'm going to make you a billionaire tomorrow that you forget there's a downside and it's actually a really bad idea. Excitement makes you overestimate your chances of success. In that moment, excitement is not your friend, it's your enemy. On the flip side, if you're angry about something, maybe it's because you saw some sort of social injustice that you want to stand up for somebody. It can give you courage when you need it. So how many parents will say, wasn't until that teacher said that to my kid that I called up and I didn't care anymore and I was able to step in? It's because you're angry. So anger is not a bad emotion either. So once you name your emotion, you say, hey, is this my friend or my enemy right now? If it's your friend, you embrace it. If it's your enemy, then you take steps to say, I'm going to shift how I feel. Lots of different ways to do that. If I feel anxious and I pace back and forth all day, guess what? I'm going to ramp up my anxiety. But if I say, I'm going to go for a quick run or I'm going to meditate for a little while, knowing that there are skills that you can use to stop adding fuel to the fire. Or sometimes people are like, when I'm angry, I like to vent. Well, you know what? The more you talk about frustrating things, the more fuel you're adding to the fire and the worse you feel. So what do you do instead? Maybe I come home and I walk through the door and I'm going to tell you about the best thing in my day just to shift my mood a little bit. So I would say those three things to begin with. You name your feelings, ask, is this a friend or an enemy right now? If your feeling is an enemy, take some steps to say, how do I regulate this emotion to bring it down a couple notches? Our emotions cloud our judgment. You want to bring your emotions down so you can think a little more clearly and then you can make better decisions.
Makes perfect sense. So let's talk about then, you brought up maybe running, meditating, maybe deep breathing, some other ways as well. Do you meditate?
I'm not a huge meditator, so I live on a sailboat, so my life is pretty calm anyway. There's not a lot of going on, but for me, I love to jet ski. The hum of a jet ski going through the water, I guess in that way I would say that's a meditative activity for me, but I'm not just sitting in a quiet room doing traditional meditation.
So just briefly explain to us, for those that may not know, what is happening from a physiological standpoint when we either meditate, let's say, or deep breathing, or we find that thing, that piece, whether it's the jet skiing or whether it's jogging, running, biking, whatever. What is happening to our mind and to our bodies? Why is it working?
Yeah, that deep relaxation that we can get into calms your nervous system down, and it can make it so that your body stops pumping out all those stress hormones, and your heart rate slows, you feel a little bit better physically, but also affects your brain. We know that when people get into those calmer states, your brain will start to see the world a little bit differently. I mean, you can see on MRIs, people who are regular meditators, they actually change the matter in their brain. And we know that most of our life is spent either rehashing something that already happened or worrying about something that we think is going to happen in the future. And when you practice meditation and mindfulness, you're able to say, I'm going to be present. I'm going to pay attention to what's going on right in front of me right now. And that has tons of benefits, from being able to feel better, to think better, to have better relationships. People live longer. The list kind of goes on and on. But it's something that we have to practice. Otherwise, it's so easy to be distracted by our phones, and we're scrolling through it whenever we have a spare second, or we're so busy with all of these jumbled thoughts that our brains start to feel kind of chaotic. In fact, they ask people, would you rather sit quietly and meditate for 15 minutes or submit yourself to an electric shock? 25% of the women say, give me the electric shock, and then almost 75% of men take the electric shock because we're afraid to be alone with our thoughts. Yeah, which is bizarre, right?
That's
so
crazy.
I think being comfortable in your own skin, so even if you aren't a traditional, a meditator who says, I'm going to sit here and meditate for 15 minutes in a quiet room all by myself, there are other ways to say, I'm going to practice mindfulness, and I'm going to practice doing something that just gets my body into a deeper state of rest.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go to breath work for a moment, because there's all different types of breathing techniques. Based on what you've seen, what is the simplest method for somebody who is today maybe not aware or not intentional about breathing? What would you suggest to someone?
Ooh, I would say smell the pizza. So, and I'll explain what that means. Because people come into my office and they're like, I breathe in on 4 and breathe out on 8, or there's some sort of box I'm supposed to do. I forget it. And when I'm stressed out, the last thing I want to do is try to remember this breathing sequence. But if you just remember, smell the pizza, you won't forget it, and you can do it no matter where you are. Basically, it works like this. You're just going to breathe in through your nose like you're smelling a delicious piece of pizza. So you breathe in slow and deep. And then you hold that breath just for like a count of 3, somewhere around there. And you can't wait to take a bite out of this pizza, but it's really hot. So you have to blow on it like you're blowing off a piece of pizza. So you blow out through your lips. And you do that 3 times. You just smell the pizza. So whether you're in a staff meeting that's kind of stressful, your kids are misbehaving in the other room, or you're in the car and you're stressed out, you just smell the pizza a couple of times. Calms both your brain and your body. And it's a really easy one to remember, because who doesn't want to smell the pizza when you're stressed out?
Well, 2 things. Number 1, my stress level just went down. Not that it was too high to begin with, but it went down. And number 2, you just made me remind myself to call my wife and ask her if she could order pizza for tonight. So thank you
Sounds
for
good,
that.
doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I want to know who delivers to your boat.
Right.
Excellent. So what are some of the common misconceptions that you hear or people are saying online about mental strength? And when you hear about those common misconceptions, how do you respond to them?
So I don't like it when people say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, because it doesn't. I have plenty of people that have come in my therapy office and went through hardship, and they're scarred. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you are a weak person if something tragic that you went through left you with some deep scars and you're not the same person anymore. It doesn't have to make you stronger. So that's one of the biggest ones, I think, is when people say that. I think another big one is people think that you can see if somebody's strong. So I just saw this argument play out on social media with these 2 influencers who are talking about the amount of physical muscle you have is directly related to the amount of mental strength that you have. So if you work out a lot, right, that clearly it means like, yeah, then you're a really mentally strong person. I know plenty of people that go to the gym not because they like are invested in mental strength, but because they hate themselves or they have eating issues or an exercise addiction. Like, it's not just because you have self-discipline doesn't mean that you are necessarily mentally strong. So that's another big misconception. And then the third one would be just going back to that whole idea that people who push through anything at any cost and they deny any pain somehow means that they exemplify mental strength. And we see this with like Navy SEALs, for example. And that attitude serves a purpose sometimes. If you're in a combat situation, obviously you don't really want to turn to the guy next to you and start talking about your emotional struggles. In that moment, you need to push it all down. But in real life, like, self-compassion, we know, is really the key. Gratitude, cutting yourself some slack sometimes. Those are really the keys to getting better. And when I see these things or hear these things, like, I try to be curious, listen to what people have to say, and try not to get into the, heated social media debates, but try to also clear up those misconceptions on my own podcast or in my book so that I can make sure that people have a better understanding of what true mental strength really is.
Good for you. I think that's showing mental strength right there by not being pulled into a situation, but using it and turning it into a positive. How can I take that, speak to it in the right format, on the right platform, and then deliver something of value that is going to actually impact and help people out versus just creating likes and comments and whatnot on social media. I love that. So what are the factors, Amy, that for all of us that are really trying to improve and strengthen our mental strength itself, what are the factors that determine whether that's going to be easy or difficult for us?
So in that realm, it is like building physical strength, right? Sometimes genetics plays a bit of a part in that. Or
how specifically?
So you might be more genetically predisposed to anxiety disorders. Those run in the family. An anxiety disorder isn't a sign of weakness, but it's like a contributing factor that makes it a little more complicated. Just like if I inherited high blood pressure as a genetic factor, I might have more trouble becoming an athlete physically. So that can be one thing. And then our personalities. Some people just have a personality that makes them more agreeable, more outgoing. They have more social support simply because of who they are. Whereas other people have a personality that maybe they're a little more on the neurotic end and they struggle a little bit more. So knowing that, and then your life experiences. What kind of childhood did you have? What did you learn about yourself? And then whatever life experience you have right now affects it too. Are you in an unhealthy relationship as opposed to, gosh, I have this amazing group of friends and family and a partner who's super supportive and a job that I love? Obviously, the environment is going to play a huge role in that too. So the things around you. Just like, again, if we talked about physical health and physical strength, if you tried to become a physically healthy person and you were surrounded by people who are completely inactive and you lived in a house that only had junk food in it, it's going to be much tougher. Same can be said with mental strength and mental health. The environment that you're in and the people you're surrounded by certainly play a role in that too.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. That's very helpful. So we're not going to go through every one of the 13 things that mentally strong people don't do, but we are certainly going to encourage everyone to go out and buy a copy of the book. There's a whole series of books that are all tied to that same type of theme, but with a different audience. So make sure that you check out the links that we provide in the show notes. But there's a couple that I'd like to highlight if we could speak to these for a moment. The first one that you wrote down, and let me ask you a question. When you were writing this note to yourself, was this the order that's in the book? Is this the order on which you actually wrote down each of these items?
It is, yep.
It is.
And it's
okay.
in the order that I needed the most in those moments.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So the very first one, they don't waste time feeling sorry for themselves. I mean, this one, that had to be so difficult to come to terms with and try to overcome. So speak to that one for a moment, and what can we do? Because you provide great tools and strategies in the book and stories that go along with each of these, right? But what can we do to stop feeling sorry for ourselves?
Yeah, when I wrote the list, that's exactly where I was. It was about 7 years. I'd lost my mom, I'd lost my husband, and my father-in-law had a couple of weeks to live. And I just thought, like, this isn't fair. There's so many people who haven't lost anybody in the last 7 years. Why do I have to lose like 3 out of my favorite people? I don't have that many favorite people in my life, and here we go. And that's where I was. And I was like, that's not helpful. Yep, this is sad, and it's going to be painful, but I didn't need to overestimate how bad my life was or underestimate my ability to cope. And that's really where we are when we're feeling sorry for ourselves, is we're thinking this is so dreadful that I'll never recover, and it's so awful that I can't handle it. And that's when we start to like dig in our heels and get stuck, where somebody might say, I feel sorry for myself and therefore there's no use in trying. And you start to become a bit helpless and hopeless. And then because you aren't doing anything to make your life or somebody else's life any better, then you stay stuck there. And that's what I didn't want to do, is I didn't want to be like, well, now my life is so awful, then I can use that as an excuse to not do anything with the rest of my life. Even though in that moment I had thoughts where I thought, gosh, I can't possibly handle one more loss. And I doubted my ability to do it, but it wasn't like I had a choice.
Amazing. And as we're going through this, and as I was reading the book, I'm thinking to myself, you created this letter to yourself at the darkest moment in your life up to that point. And the fact that you were able to get perspective and pull the lens back a bit to be able to think more logically than emotionally, I think is in and of itself incredible. And I under the same circumstances, I'm not quite sure I would have that same ability to do so. The next item, number 2, is they don't give away their power. Speak to that one.
So this one is when we're tempted to blame somebody else for either the way we think, the way we feel, or the way we behave. So when we say something like, my cousin makes me feel bad about myself, or my boss makes me work late, or somebody ruined my day or wasted my time. Like, we're implying that they have that power to do those things. But the truth is, it's up to us. We decide how we spend our time, who we spend it with, what we're going to do. And there might be consequences, right? If I don't work late, my boss might say, I'm not going to pay you, or you're fired. But still, just taking back my power is about being like, okay, I don't want to do this, but I choose to do it anyway, and here's why. And that slight shift in our language makes a huge difference. And it could be anything from, oh, I have to go to the grocery store after work. Well, do you have to? No, you get to. And that slight shift makes a huge difference in our ability to see like the power that we have to be in control of our lives. Sometimes we don't want that. It's easier to blame other people for, ruining your life or making you have a bad day. But really, it's nobody's fault but your own. You have the power to change that. And I really, in that moment, wanted to take back that power in my life. Like, yep, this is not the hand I would have chosen, but it was the one I was dealt. And what am I going to do with it?
Wow, this is so good. All right, the next one, which is one that I can tell you I have personally done a lot of work on and continue to. It's something that I tend to fall back on, and it's they don't worry about pleasing everyone. So speak to those who are the people pleasers in our audience, and everything they do, they're doing because they're trying to please someone else.
Yeah, it's tough not to when you are a natural people pleaser, as some of us are. But we know from the research, like one of the things that I realized early on as a therapist was one of the biggest reasons why people don't reach their goals is because they're people pleasers. And there's tons of science behind this. If I go throughout my entire day trying to make everybody else happy, by mid-afternoon, I literally have nothing left over and my willpower is gone and I'm much more likely to sabotage myself. Happens all the time. And even down to like little things. So if somebody is a people pleaser and they sit across from somebody else and you put a bowl of M&Ms in the table, as long as the other person on the other side is still eating M&Ms, the people pleaser matches them M&M for M&M. And because we're like, oh, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable that you're still eating and I'm not, so I'm going to keep doing this. Most people would never recognize that they do that because it's subconscious. It's just something that's been ingrained in them for a really long time to say, I want everybody around me to feel comfortable. But when we do that, we lose sight of who we are, we sabotage our own goals, and we have to come to that conclusion of like, hey, I actually can't make you happy. It's up to you to do, and I'm going to be responsible for my own happiness. I can still be a kind and a pleasant person, and I can still do these things for you, even if I don't necessarily want to help you move your furniture on a Saturday. I could choose to do that. But if I feel like I have to, and I'm starting to become bitter and angry, or I feel like I can't reach my own goals because I'm doing everything else for everyone, then that's when it becomes a problem.
So let's tie that particular one back to a personal example of where you were at this stage in time when it comes to worrying about pleasing everyone. So what was going through your mind specific to that point?
I was in a place where it was a weird place, right? I was a 26-year-old widow, so my life didn't look like my friends' lives. My friends were all getting remarried, getting married for the first time, talking about having kids. I had just gotten remarried, thought, woo, like I got a new house, new job, and like life was starting to look pretty good. I thought, now I have to go through this other loss. Like, what are people going to expect from me? Like, well, Amy's cursed, she's got bad luck, everybody around her. Or were they going to expect me to be like, well, this one's your father-in-law as opposed to your husband, so you should only be this sad compared to when you lost somebody else. There's so many expectations about grief and what you're supposed to look like when you're a widow. People would say that to me all the time, but you don't look like a widow. I'm like, well, would you like me to put on a black veil and walk around for 3 years? Like, so many strange things that come up for us. And so I think I just in that moment was like, whatever I grieve, however I grieve it, like that's going to be okay. And if other people don't understand, they don't have to. And I'm going to be fine with that. That if people have questions, if people raise concerns, like I'm okay with that.
I can't believe some of the things that people say in situations like that. It really is mind-boggling. Did you have to let certain people go from your circle as you were going through this and growing through this?
Yeah, so my childhood friends are still my best friends, and I'm super thankful for that. Like several of my childhood friends are still really close to me. But certainly relationships change and shift, and Lincoln's family is still really close to me. I talk to them every day and grateful for that. But like Lincoln's friends, they didn't really know what to do. Like, are they supposed to now be my friend, or how does that work? Or I'm the reminder for a lot of people of the fact that Lincoln wasn't here anymore. So talking to me, I know, was painful for some people. And then, of course, getting remarried. I remember thinking, like, how am I going to tell people I'm getting remarried? I got married the second time at a drive-thru in Las Vegas because I didn't want to have a wedding where people would have to come. And although I knew they'd be happy for me, I also knew they'd be sad because part of the reason that I'm getting married is because my first husband died. And so I was like, let's just make it really fun. And it can be fun for us, but it doesn't have to be fun for everybody else. We'll just go to the drive-thru. And so, but and then I find a lot of people now, like, I live on a sailboat. So my true friends have stayed my true friends. Incredibly grateful for that. Our relationship has grown over the years. I think we've become a lot closer because of it. Some, of course, friendships have shifted. Some have changed. There are some people I used to talk to all the time that I no longer speak to. But just like everybody, when you go through changes in life, whether you have a new family, you have kids, you move, you get a different job, those things happen. And it's really about figuring out who are the core people who you want to stick with through thick and thin over the years.
Yeah, that is brilliant. So as we are wrapping up our conversation, before I ask my final question to you, I would love it if you would give our audience and me a challenge. What is something that you would challenge us to do right now?
Oh, that's a great question, too. I would challenge you to pick something that you have been on the fence about doing. Maybe it's a goal that you've thought, oh, I really want to do this, but I haven't. Or maybe it's something you've started to do, but you can't stick with it. And I would write yourself a list of the top 10 reasons why you should do that thing. And then I want you to put it in a place where you're going to be forced to read it when it matters the most. And see if you can stick to that. Now, and for some people, it might be a habit that they want to give up. In that case, you can do the top 10 reasons why you shouldn't do that thing. But I'll give you 2 quick examples. I had a client in my therapy office who said, I want to go to the gym every day. Every morning, I'm like, yep, I'm going after work today. As soon as I get out of work, I either have to turn left to go to the gym or turn right to go home. And every day I find myself turning right. I'm like, I'm tired today, or I'll do it tomorrow. So we taped a list of the top 10 reasons why he should go to the gym onto his steering wheel. And before he started the engine every day, he would read that list and literally talk himself into turning left so that he would go to the gym. On the flip side, I had a client who used to eat a lot of late night snacks. Now she knew, like, after 9, she would just make really poor choices with food. So we hung the list on the refrigerator, the top 10 reasons why you probably don't need a snack after 9 p.m. And I said, you didn't say, hey, you can't eat after 9 p.m. I just want you to read this list first before you make the choice. And she said whenever she'd read that list, she'd like, okay, I'm not hungry. I don't need to eat something right now. And that helped her talk herself out of it. But there's something really powerful when it comes from you and it's your own words. I could lecture you, Jay, and say, here are the top 10 reasons why you should change your behavior. But if the words come from you, and these are the top 10 reasons you've come up with on your own when you're feeling kind of motivated, it will talk you into it way better than anybody else is going to.
Oh, that is brilliant. That is so good. My friends, you heard it from Amy. I hope you are going to take her up on this challenge. I can tell you I'm going to. So let's do it together. I would love to see nothing more than all of us getting involved in this and taking advantage of this fantastic advice. So, Amy, what are 1 or 2 bigger questions that you're asking yourself today? Bigger things that you're contemplating? 1 or 2?
Ooh, I would say, I guess in terms of like, what's next for me? Like when, I obviously wrote an article, didn't plan on it becoming a series of books that I'd still be working on 10 years later. So I guess I just ask like, well, what's next? Do I keep writing books? Do I do something different? Like you say, a curriculum for schools. How do I best get the message about mental strength out there to the people who need it the most, and what is that going to look like in the future, and how do I want to do that? And as long as people keep showing an interest, I'll keep talking about it, and would love to just keep figuring out ways that people can figure out how to become the best versions of themselves in a cost-effective manner.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see what's next for you and the direction that you're going to go, because not only have you already created greatness, there's so much more in you that is left to be tapped into, and I know it's coming. So expect a lot more from Amy. You've done amazing work. And Amy, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you being candid, being who you are, allowing the conversation to go in lots of different directions. And I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Jay.
Absolutely. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests just like Amy. And as a matter of fact, while you're doing that, do the exact same thing for Amy. I'm going to put a link to her podcast, which is an incredible podcast. You need to subscribe to that one as well. You're going to get so much value. And to enjoy more podcasts, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure that you pick up a copy of 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.